Hey everybody! So, the type of writing that I chose is a poem. It's called Punched Out by Charles Bukowski. So, Charles Bukowski is by far my favorite poet. I mean, I don't really read any other poetry, but he's my favorite in general. Again, the poem is called Punched Out. It goes, I remember best coming out of that factory into the night. None of us saying much, glad to get out, but needing the job. Getting into our old cars, one could hear the grinding of the starters, the sudden roar and explosions as the worn engines fired up once more. As we backed wearily out of the parking lot to pull away, leaving the factory back there, each of us to a different place, some to a wife and children, others to empty rented rooms, or small crowded apartments. As for me, I never knew if my woman would be there or not, or how drunk she would be if she was home. But for each of us, the factory waited back there, our time cards punched and neatly racked. For me, somehow, the best time was that moment, driving from the factory to where I lived, stopping at the signals, looking at the crowds suspended between a place I didn't want to be and a place I didn't want to go. I was caught between my two unhappy lives, but so were most of the others there. Not only from that warehouse in that city, but in the world entire. We had no chance, yet we still all managed to continue and endure. So this poem I read originally in a book that was given to me by one of my good friends who was my roommate at the time. It's called The Night Torn Mad with Footsteps. So she originally had just loaned it to me, but when she realized how much I loved it, she just gave it to me. Unpacking this poem was a lot of fun for me. I have always loved it because it spoke to me, but I never really stopped to think about what exactly he was getting at or what he was really saying. So I am a fan of his because he makes sense to me. All of his poems, for the most part, his writing is hard and gritty, and he doesn't leave much to the imagination. I picked this poem because it is very relatable. I feel that we have all had that moment, at least I think we do at one point in our lives, of being suspended, not really going anywhere, just surviving. And there are 3 quotes from 2 articles that I will use to help me unpack this poem. I feel that they do a very good job of capturing how I personally feel about Bukowski's writing, and they also articulate why I love him so much, and I felt like this was a really great poem to showcase that. So, the first quote is from an article called 6 Things I Learned from Charles Bukowski. The quote says, "The thing about Bukowski, as opposed to many other writers, is he didn't concern himself with flowery images or beautiful sunsets. He totally wrote as if he were speaking to you." So, how that kind of plays into this poem is, I think we can all picture this. Glad to get out of work because, you hate your job, but you need the money. You've got bills to pay. I feel like you can really imagine being in your car sitting on, I don't know, like Northern Lights or headed out on the Glen, and it's wintertime, it's dark, you're tired, your window lit up in red from the brake lights in front of you. And oftentimes his subject matter is sordid, a lot of it dirty. For example, he says, I never knew if my woman would be there or not, or how drunk she would be if she was home. And if you've ever loved an alcoholic in any capacity, I feel like that is incredibly easy to relate to. And, life isn't rosy, and that's okay, because we were all surviving it together. He talks about how life differs in some way between him and his coworkers, but they had that factory in common, and their time cards were waiting for them each day. I really relate to how the best time was his drive between home and work, and I think that this might be true for a lot of people, especially people who commute. It gives you that time and space where there's nothing that you have to do except go. You're driving, you have your music playing, and you're just looking at the world around you, because that's really all you can do. You're sitting in your car, hopefully not multitasking on your phone. And I think that that's just so relatable. So the next quote is from that same article. It says, poetry allowed them to master making each word in a sentence effective and powerful. Now he's talking about a couple other poets, but also Bukowski. So the words he uses are simple, but they're so profound. You know, you don't need a dictionary when you're reading Bukowski, generally speaking. But his meaning comes across so deeply and well. He captures how simple and yet devastatingly complicated life can be. He says he was suspended between a place I didn't want to be and a place I didn't want to go. And he also says he was caught between my two unhappy lives. And then the last line, the last few lines are actually my favorite lines of this poem. And they go, not only from that warehouse in that city, but in the world entire, we had no chance, yet we all still managed to continue and endure. And I think that that is so powerful. You know, we all, despite complications or snags or things in life that are difficult for us, we keep going, you know? The last quote is from an article called The Transgressive Thrills of Charles Bukowski. And the quote says, Bukowski's free verse is really a series of declarative sentences broken up into long, narrow columns, the short lines giving an impression of speed and terseness, even when the language is sentimental or cliched. And I think this is my favorite part about this poem and Bukowski in general. His writing can seem very fragmented, and yet his intent isn't lost. If anything, I feel that it makes a bigger impact. He makes sense to me. He speaks to me. I feel like I could easily be who he is writing about. So I'll show you an example, and it is the actual poem in the book, The Night Torn Mads with Footsteps. So I don't know if you can't really read it. You'll be able to read it if you click on the link for my poem, but you can see that the way he writes his words here, it feels like he's definitely taking control of how you read the poem. So you can see where he wants his words to have the most impact, and it shows his meter. It's not like your traditional poem. It actually is, they are actually sentences just broken up and fragmented to get his point across. And that's one of my most favorite parts about his writing. So I hope that this poem was entertaining or interesting to you. And if nothing else, I hope that it can be something that's relatable. I feel like Bukowski is such a raw person, and I really appreciate that about him. I think that you don't have to sugarcoat things. Life is not it is simple, but it isn't simple, and I feel like he really gets that across. And I hope that you enjoyed this poem, and I look forward to reading your responses. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a great day.